What's up, guys? My name is Almahdi. I'm an Airbnb superhost for those of you who don't know me. And what I want to make this video about is how to succeed on Airbnb, whether you already own a property, whether you're already a superhost, whether you're a host, or if you're starting off completely new. I'm going to explain to you the steps on how to launch your property and start an Airbnb business correctly, because Airbnb has completely changed this year. So the very first thing I want you to focus on if you're looking at getting into Airbnb is going to be your market research and your property research. Okay, so I have many videos that go through the entire process A to Z on launching a business in Airbnb, and you can click the link in the description to find that. This is going to be a bit more tailored around researching and identifying the properties and what's changed. So step number one, in your research, once you go to a website and use a tool called airdna.co, that property research tool is going to help you do all of your research. It gives you revenue projections on properties. You can type in an address, you can type in a city, and you can see all sorts of metrics around how successful or unsuccessful Airbnbs and Vrbo properties are in that particular city, neighborhood, etc. So that's going to be the tool that you can use. There's multiple other tools. I prefer to use airdna.co. So let's say you've already identified whether a city allows short-term rentals or not. If the property is in an HOA, which is the homeowners association, what those rules are, if they allow or disallow short-term rentals. In my experience, many HOAs do not allow short-term rentals or have restrictions around them. I'm actually at one of my properties now that allows short-term rentals in an HOA, but that's typically an exception. And there's a lot of events that happen in this city on an annual basis, pretty big global international events. So that is a bit of an exception to the rule, but in most cases, I prefer to stay away from HOAs. My other properties have always been not in HOAs. So make sure you do your due diligence on Google. You can even go to Airbnb.com and do a search on your city, and it'll break down the regulations. Do a quick Google search, use ChatGPT to understand the regulations in the city that you're looking to do Airbnb in. Now understand, regulations are not always a bad thing, because if there's a bit of a barrier to entry, that will help make sure that that market is not so saturated, which is important for you. Because if you're in a regulated environment that's just not too regulated, that can protect you and insulate you. And that makes, if you have a successful Airbnb or Airbnb business, that's going to be better for you because it's harder for anyone else to come into the market and compete with you. So keep that in mind. So what's changed in 2025? One of the things you need to make sure when you're researching is the amenities that property has, because 2025 and beyond of Airbnb and the entire business, you can only really compete and succeed and dominate in your market if you've got stellar, amazing, incredible amenities. So what do I mean by this? What are some examples of amenities that work? If the property that you have, or find if you're going to buy, or if you're going to do rental arbitrage or co-hosting, whatever the business model is. And again, I have a course that explains, it's completely free. Click the link in the description, exactly how to understand which model works best for you, okay? So back to what I was sharing with you about the amenities. Properties that have, for example, a pool, a spa, a sauna, a movie theater, a mini movie theater, or a theater room. It doesn't have to be some extravagant, movie theater, but I mean a theater room, maybe with a projector. Do you have games, board games, big live person chess, those big games where you can kind of stand up, whether it's Jenga or, chess that's on the floor, you can pick up the pieces and move them. These interactive large games and amenities are a huge plus. There's also golf. At this property, you have a mini driving range where you can hit the ball. It's pretty much a simulator, but it's not a computerized simulator. It's an actual mini golf that you can, blast the ball into a net. And that's because when I did my research here, people love coming to this particular city for really big golf events. So that's a pro, that's a plus. You need these amenities as part of your research. You have to find the amenities that are important for the demographic of person and people and groups, families, friends. Why do people come to your location? So amenities are huge. Another amenity that I installed at a different property is a pickleball court. And I immediately saw an increase in bookings and people wanting to stay at that property. So again, the name of the game is standing out from your competition. So regardless of the business model you're choosing, especially if you're buying a property because that's a high investment, you need to make sure that you're purchasing a property with great amenities before you even try to run Airbnb on it, right? Because that's going to dictate how successful or unsuccessful you are. When you're also comparing your property to others, which is part of your research, you're going to do that on AirDNA. You can see all the properties in your neighborhood and click the link. I'll have a different training where I show you an actual live demo on how to use AirDNA. And this is something I share with my actual students and mentees when I walk them through how to do their research. But what you want to do is click into those properties that are doing the best and see what type of amenities and designs they have at their property. Another way you can do this is simply going on Airbnb.com and look up your city and zoom in on your particular neighborhood and understand what the amenities are in your area that are doing very well. So you're basically going to find the properties that are the nicest and the most booked, and you can verify those rental projections on AirDNA. But even without that, you can just click the calendar and see, how well they're booked. And if the calendar is pretty fully booked out, then you know that those properties are dominating their market. And then take a look at what those amenities are that are working for those individuals and those particular properties. You want to make sure before you buy a property or before you do rental arbitrage and sign that 12, 18, 24-month lease, that you have at least those amenities or have a plan to install those amenities or improve upon them. So ideally, you want to make your amenities even better. So for example, if people come to your area to cool off and unwind and during the summer or warm months, there's probably going to be a need for a pool and a jacuzzi. You want to make sure that your property at least has that, right? And that way you won't underperform and you'll actually be making a wise investment. Very, very important. I have plenty of other videos that explain the big change in 2025 is that any host that has properties that focus on the guest experience and the amenities at that property and stack amenities, those are going to be the properties that absolutely dominate in 2025. So part of what I do when I'm looking at properties and even when I'm working with my students to help them find properties that are going to work or are very likely to work well in their market is making sure they've done that thorough due diligence on the property and it already comes with great amenities or they have a plan to build amenities. Okay, so again, I'll give you some pool, spa, saunas, pickleball courts are doing phenomenally. Right now, there's a big pickleball trend in the United States and really the world. So those are great ones. If you had a little mini basketball court, and I understand these, especially if you're purchasing, can take quite an investment. However, it's a well worth it sort of investment, right? Because if you're purchasing a property, you want to make sure that that property is going to cash flow well. And again, when you stand out, you will claim all that market and you will be booked. A note for anyone that already has properties. If you already have properties and they're starting not to perform as well as they used to, that's because the demand for more amenities and the competition is likely increasing and getting enhanced to the point that I'm making in this entire video. So what you want to do is see what amenities people are installing or just come up with your own outdoor amenities or interior amenities based on the demographic that you serve, right? At the end of the day, we're in the hospitality business. So the demographic that you're serving wants to be taken care of and they want to have an amazing experience. And that's what's going to make you stand out. So for example, maybe you can add a pickleball court, okay? Maybe you can add a movie theater room. Maybe you can add a game room. If you have a garage, a great way to take advantage of that space is to convert the garage into a game room. You can put arcade games, you can put pool, ping pong, all of these different fun activities for children and even adults. That is going to be the reason people book your property, and that's how you're going to succeed in 2025. So, I don't want to keep going over it and harping on it, but I'm telling you guys that that is the way. Again, if you're getting into Airbnb or if you already have Airbnb properties, focus on enhancing the experience and increasing the number of amenities that you have that stand out in your area. And if you're starting an Airbnb from scratch, make sure that the most due diligence that you're doing outside of the regulations and making sure you're compliant is making sure your property is going to stand out and be a outstanding property in the area and in the market that you selected. Okay, so that's step number one. And that's going to largely determine your success when you launch your Airbnb business. Okay, so once you lock in that property, if you're purchasing a property, there's multiple ways to go about that. One thing that I just did, actually, the property I'm in right now, I purchased about a year and a half ago, and I was able to take over the existing mortgage on the property. Okay, so if you're looking to purchase a property, make sure that you're using a profitability calculator before you purchase that and run the numbers on that property. This is very, very important and something that I do with all of my students. You can actually reach out to me and I'll give you my deal analyzer, and you can see exactly the numbers that I take a look at and how I evaluate the profitability of a property, all the numbers so that you can see the expenses versus how much income it's going to bring as a projection. And it's very important that you don't miss out on any expenses. So there's utilities, there's HOA fees, there's landscaping, pool maintenance, if you have a pool, property taxes, all of these things need to go into your calculation to make sure that you can determine if it's a good investment. Okay, so you can reach out to me and I can get my profitability calculator over to you. And if you're doing rental arbitrage, you also still have to run the numbers, and very similar process. It's just that you're not purchasing. So your return and how you're going to evaluate that will be a little bit different. And again, similar to co-hosting, you don't have much skin in the game, honestly, because the owner of the property is the one that's paying many of the expenses if you do this correctly. But again, in general, you have to analyze the deal you're making and make sure that it is profitable once all the expenses have gone in. Another pro tip is understand the seasonality of that property and of that market. What do I mean by that? Is there a certain time of the year where most of your bookings come in and most of your revenue comes in? Is there a time, for example, people love traveling to your location in the summer? Do people love traveling to your location in the winter? Is it a more stable market where there's not too much fluctuation, right? All of this ties into the strategy and cash flow projections that you're going to want to consider when you're especially purchasing a property. So one thing that I also do, by the way, for anyone that's looking to buy an Airbnb, feel free to reach out to me. I work with a few people per month. You can click the link in the description to apply to see if you qualify to work with me. But one of the things that I love doing is helping my student negotiate the property. So negotiating sales price. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least tens of thousands of dollars in concessions, or even just in general on the price of the home, if you know what you're doing and if you know how to negotiate. Okay, and there's many ways to go about this. Again, I'm going to say that for those students that I work with. Please make sure you're not leaving money on the table, and that is one way that you can go into a deal already profitable just from equity. Okay, because in real estate, and anyone that you know that's in real estate that has done well, they'll tell you that the money that you make really on a real estate deal is in the purchase. It's not in when you sell. If you buy at the right price, you're going to do just fine. And again, you're going to supercharge your returns if you're following this exact procedure properly, and you're going to have the cash flow coming in as well as the tax advantages. Okay? So once you've already done that and you've locked in your property, the next step is your Airbnb listing. Now, a few different things go into this process, and let's just get right into the listing, right? Entering the listing is pretty straightforward, entering all those details, because Airbnb or VRBO will walk you through that. But what the most important part of this is staging and designing the property, okay? Staging and designing the property. Now, going back to the research element, you want to make sure that your property is going to be just as nice in quality or nicer than the properties that are performing the best in your market. Now, again, why do you need to do this? So that you can compete and so that you can be the property that's getting booked. So a great way to do this is you can go on Pinterest. If your property is unfurnished and you need to furnish it, You don't need to go get a designer. You don't need to be a professional designer. I certainly was not. You can go to Pinterest and take a look at all of those nice design ideas, and you can order furniture from Amazon. You can go on online, Wayfair. There's a bunch of different places where you can get very nice looking furniture without spending too much money. But if you want to take it to the next level, which you don't necessarily have to do, you can get furniture from nicer places. But especially as a beginner, you do not need to do that. I did not do that starting out. But if you go into the luxury Airbnb market, which I try to stay into, that is where you can make top dollar and charge top-notch prices. And then you do need to pay attention to the type and quality of furniture that you have in your properties. Now, quality does not mean expensive. You can still have quality without paying too much money. So make sure you strike that balance, okay? You can even buy properties. My very first property came furnished and I just enhanced the furniture, okay? I enhanced the furniture after I already purchased it. So keep that in mind. But yeah, Pinterest is a great place to start. Once you've got all that together and you've got your property furnished, the most important part of your marketing is going to come into play, which is your photography. You're going to need to get a stellar photographer for your Airbnb listing, because when someone is scrolling around on Airbnb, there's so many properties they're inundated with, so much coming at them. You're going to want to stick out. Now, how do you do that? You're going to want a photographer that knows real estate photography and has done Airbnb photography. A great place to find this resource, and photographers or movers or anyone that's going to help you stage the property, is Thumbtack. Thumbtack's a great place. Any of these places online where you can hire freelance workers, you can find some top quality individuals there. And always, especially for photographers, make sure you ask for their book of business so you can see that they've done really, really nice photography for real estate. You're going to want twilight photos and daytime photos. So twilight photos are right before the sunset. You have a different, have a nice, sky. Now, again, you can get all this edited, but it's the picture quality and how the lights really stick out. That is the reason you're going to want really nice twilight photos as well as daytime photos. You want to be able to set the scene and the stage and the mood in your photos for your guests so that when they're scrolling, they can picture themselves in the listing at your property. And that's going to be a great way to help them click and envision staying at your home. So make sure you pick the right real estate photographer. Another very key tip for your photography is, if you can, for example, if you have a backyard and all these amenities, which you should, an aerial drone footage for a main image is always a great way to stand out. And that way you can capture everything in your backyard or everything in your property from an aerial view. That's a great thing to do. But in general, even if you don't use a drone and don't have an aerial footage, your main picture is going to want to be one where you can put as many of your amenities in that photo as possible. So if you can squeeze in like your pool and your spa, and you've got like golf in the back or any other amenities that you can push into that main image, that's going to help your property pop out and stick out in Airbnb, and it's going to make people click your listing, which is then going to boost you in the Airbnb algorithm and make it much more likely that you're going to get selected and booked and reserved. So I can't emphasize this enough. Never, never, never cheap out. Please, guys, do not cheap out on your photos. That is exactly where you want to honestly overspend if you can, because that's what's going to make people click and actually make you money. We're in this business ultimately to make money. And the way you do that is having your property be selected and you to beat everybody in Airbnb or VRBOrbooking.com, having the best photos. Okay. Now, I won't spend too much time on the listing. It's pretty straightforward. Make sure you use AI, by the way, and ChatGPT, especially this year and moving on, to create your listing descriptions. Some things you need to include in your descriptions are, for example, the distance to all the landmarks. So all the landmarks in your area, why do people come? Do they have events in your area? Why does your demographic come to stay in your particular city? All of that needs to be in the listing. The number of bedrooms, all of the amenities, the number of bathrooms, if you have any ensuite bathrooms in your master bedrooms, make sure all of that is included. The size of the televisions. Do you have, another pro tip, do you have baby equipment? So high chairs, baby baths, a crib, anything like that is going to help families, for example, stay at your property. So anything that can differentiate you. You want all of this in that listing description, and use ChatGPT. You can enter a prompt. For example, I have a property, let's just say in wherever, right? Washington State, Miami, let's say Miami. Create an Airbnb listing description for my Miami 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house that has a pool and is this far away from, Miami Beach. And again, I'm just making this up, but just to give you the idea, that prompt, you hit enter, and also have it, say, list the walking distance in minutes or driving distance in minutes from the top attractions in my city that Airbnb guests come to visit. Boom. There's your entire prompt is going to give you, ChatGPT is going to give you exactly what to copy paste and put into your listing. And then when you go through your amenities, make sure you fill in every single aspect of your property and the amenities that are in there. One thing you cannot overlook is when you're going through the amenities and you're creating the listing, click the plus sign on, for example, if you have a pool, if you click the plus sign on that amenity, you can go and further describe that it's a heated pool, how big the pool is, and certain amenities have that additional detail that you can apply to them. Make sure you do that, and that way you're going to rank better in the algorithm, and people know exactly what it is that your property has versus the other folks in your area. So you want to stack the odds in your favor. Okay, so once you've created your listing, another thing that you want to do is make sure you have your staff. So your cleaning staff is the most important person or person's team, and are pretty much your property manager. Okay, so you don't have to tell them that, but basically they keep an eye on your property. You always want to take very good care of your cleaners, and you might have to go through a couple cleaners. You can also find them also on Thumbtack, similar websites where you found your photographer, and hire a proper cleaning staff and team or person, cleaner, that can take care of your property and can make it very, very detailed and nice and super clean for your guests, because cleanliness is the #1 important aspect of your Airbnb. It's just like a hotel. Imagine you go to a hotel or an Airbnb, the moment you come in and you see a hair, that paints a negative experience for the entire stay. You don't ever want that. So you're going to have to micromanage your cleaners in the beginning, not in a negative way, but giving them a checklist on exactly what to do. But the way to avoid this altogether is really to have a cleaner that has already done or does Airbnb cleanings, because they know exactly what to look for. Okay? So once you've found your cleaner, that's your first staff member. Now, once you've gotten one property and you've got your cleaner for that property, and if you have a pool, you need a pool person. If you have a lawn or bushes and plants and grass, you need a landscaper. You can find all of these folks in the same places and make sure they do a great job. They're pretty much going to run your property and your operation, like the operations side, right? So you make sure that you take care of them and that they also do a phenomenal job. That's a crucial part of your business. Now, managing your property outside of that, you don't really need a virtual assistant if you've only got one property, but it's a very nice to have if you can manage by yourself. By the way, I started out managing myself for the first at least 6 months. And then once I started scaling, and just to have more time, I hired a virtual assistant. And you can also find these on Fiverr or Upwork, any of these websites where you can find a teammate that will help manage your day-to-day. And then they're going to be running these softwares, which brings me to my next step. For automating your business, there's key softwares that you absolutely need. Now, there's so many different softwares, but the ones that you absolutely need are a pricing software, #1. So there's Price Labs, and Beyond Pricing. Both of these softwares are great, and I've used both of them. You can basically plug in your property. They sync up with all of your listings on Vrbo, Booking.com, Airbnb, and they allow you to not have to manually go in and update the pricing day by day. They have all the data on what's going on in your market, in your area. They have the data on all your competition, and that way you can dynamically, pretty much the tool is doing this, dynamically handle the pricing for you so that you don't have to set all of those detailed prices day by day, and you're not leaving money on the table. This is a huge key for being able to be as profitable as you can. You don't want to price too high so that people don't book you, and you don't want to price too low so that you're missing out on thousands of dollars in your pocket. So that's number one. Number two is Hospitable. Hospitable is a software that helps you manage all of your bookings, all of your listings, all in one centralized place, especially when you have more than one property, or even if you have just one property. If you have multiple listings, that helps you manage all of your revenue. It helps you manage all of your, and automate all of your communications with guests. So this is what I have my VA. They're in there. They can set up automatic prompts for, requesting reviews, greeting the guests, sending check-in information. All of that is handled from this one software called Hospitable. So make sure you get that, check that out. Now there's multiple other softwares that you can use when you start scaling that, in my opinion, are not absolutely necessary. But those are the two keys that you want as far as softwares to help streamline and automate your entire business, because you got into Airbnb not to have another job. Yes, to make a lot more money, but not to have another job, okay? So we've got all of those pieces of the pie together. Once you've put all that together, you got your Airbnb listing up, you got your photos up, you took spectacular photos and uploaded those. Next is getting your bookings, okay? So if you've followed all of these steps from A to Z, you should be able to get a booking within 24 to 48 hours. And that is exactly what I've consistently been able to do with the students that I've worked with and all my mentees. I love helping them find their properties, helping them negotiate properties, especially when they're purchasing, or even getting a property from a rental arbitrage landlord. So for those of you that are actually interested in working with me one-on-one, click the link in the description, and I would love to help you. See if you're qualified to work with me. You can fill out the application. It should take you about 30 seconds. And again, I only take about 3 students per month. I'd love to help you out. And for those of you that want to just watch the YouTube content, I have plenty of content that you could check out, all free. And I hope you're able to dominate if you get into the Airbnb business in 2025 and beyond. Be great.